Okay, welcome back. So this will be the third part of Lecture 3 on post-Smithian economic thought. In this video, we will be covering the basics of the Ricardian economic system and the Ricardian steady state. In the previous part 2, Lecture 3, Part 2, we covered Ricardo's theory of differential rents. This presentation will assume you have a solid working knowledge of that theory, as this is based upon that to a large extent. And so if that is unclear, please review that video first to really get the most out of what you're going to see here. All right, let's hop into it then. So, as I mentioned, Ricardo's system attempts to explain the following items: rents, profits, wages, value and price, although value and price will get to a little bit. We're not going to try to get at that in this one. We'll try to get at that in the next presentation. But economic growth, and then also steady state conditions. Now, by steady state, when classical economists talk about that, when they use that term, what they mean is that the point at which economic growth no longer occurs. Now, all the classical economists were sort of steady state theorists, including Smith, right? They all thought there was sort of an end to economic growth, that economic growth could not proceed indefinitely. They come to different conclusions about what causes a steady state and what the steady state looks like, but that was really the norm at the time and continued that way for some time after Ricardo. And so again, quickly, remember that in the theory of differential rents covered in the last presentation, we assumed that there are multiple gradations of land, from high quality land to lower quality land, and that land would exhibit diminishing returns, and that yielded certain results about the relative or the gradation in prices of land, as well as general land use patterns. Okay, so in this model, we're going to build off that idea. So that theory of differential rents is foundational, and we're going to make several additional assumptions to construct this model. We're going to assume that demand is perfectly elastic, but limited by population. So in other words, if you make more corn or whatever our food product is, people will eat more of it until they're full, and then they won't eat any more. Okay, so essentially demand is individual food satiation times population. Okay. So it's basically the same as Smith. People will eat more, but they're limited by the size of their stomachs. I think it's pretty close to Smith's turn of phrase. Wages tend towards subsistence. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But that this follows from Malthus, and again, pretty normal in classical economics. The idea that wages can rise above subsistence for short periods of time, but that ultimately, whenever that was the case, people would have more kids and drive the wage rate back down to subsistence. Now, Ricardo allows for the idea that subsistence changes over time, right? So, what we consider to be needs in time period A, needs and wants in time period A may be different in time period B, right? Wants may become needs over time. So think things like cell phones, which most people seem to think they need now, or automobiles, or any number of technological innovations that have become central to our lives that weren't at earlier points in history. Okay. We also going to assume that 100% of capital turns over annually. Ends up being an important assumption, again, like in the previous one where we had capital and labor combined, and we talked about a little bit about why Ricardo did that, mathematical expediency. Similar here. right? Similar here. We're going to assume that all capital essentially has to start over with each year. So if you think of this like a farm, which is a corn model, right? All the sort of capital equipment of the farm is fully worn out after 1 year, and then sort of you have to, get new stuff every spring. Unrealistic, but it makes the model a little simpler and doesn't really fundamentally change the results. So as long as the rate of profit is greater than 0, we're going to assume that new investment will occur, right? So capitalists who earn profits will dump all that profit back into the productive process, wherever profit exists, right? So it's to use an overused phrase, it's sort of 100% trickle down. So capitalists aren't going to retain any profit. Landowners, that's a different story, but talked about that in the last one. But owners of capital will pour everything back in to the system. That investment that we just discussed leads to productivity gains, and those productivity gains are going to make labor and capital more productive than they were in the past. So if you want to continue sort of the farm analogy, farmer invests year 2, and then the workers have better technology to work with, and they're able to be more productive. Okay, we're going to assume the population is the labor force, right? So that's something that it's different from Malthus, and it's different from Smith. And it's a simplifying assumption: population equals labor force, so everybody's a farm worker or something like this. And then we're going to assume we just have one firm and one product, so it's corn. Okay, usually these are called corn models. Piero Serafa is the one who, in the 20th century, sort of redid all this stuff and brought it, made it a lot more sophisticated. But assume it's one agricultural product, and it's just one, the whole economy is sort of one giant farm, if you will. All right, now this this graph here is reproduced from your text, so it's not exactly the same as your text because I made it, right? But it's pretty much the same. So, for reference, this is Blaug, page 86. So Mark Blaug's Economic Theory in Retrospect, 5th edition, page 86. And from here we can illustrate several things. First, rents are the sum of triangular area DCE and ABCD. So where's my mouse? Here we go. So this triangular area here, as well as this rectangular area here, the sum of that is our rents. Again, just based straight off of what we did last time. And then we have this area below that ends up being our payment to labor and capital. So this rectangular area here is our payments to labor and capital. We said last time we assumed that was $140 just to make the numbers kind of work conveniently. And so this would be 140 times whatever M is, and number of workers, and that would be our total labor capital bill. Okay. Now, what we weren't able to do last time is to explain exactly what wages or profits would be, right? That wasn't really our purpose in our theory of rents. So what we're going to do now is build in an idea of subsistence wages into this model, and we're going to say, okay, well, wages tend towards subsistence, and we're just going to say, right, we're going to arbitrarily pick a level, and we're going to say that this rectangular area here, which is MKW0, or however you want to express that rectangle, is going to represent subsistence wage payments for M production, M usage of capital and labor. And then, of course, the remainder, this upper box here, KWBA, becomes profits at M output. Okay, so I'm going to come to M prime in just a moment here. All right, so just to reiterate where we are, rents this area here, straight from our theory of differential rents in part 2. And then we've made an arbitrary distinction here about what initial subsistence wages are. We'll talk about this more in a couple slides, but we're sort of assuming that we're not already at the steady state. And we're not already at the steady state. That means that this line has to be less than this line. Okay, and that'll become clearer as we move on. So any value that we pick for subsistence that's less than this, whatever arbitrary value we pick, the model will work just fine. In other words, as long as we assume that we're not already at the steady state, model will work just fine. Predictions will remain the same. All right. So note that at M output, profit is greater than 0. So we just talked about that. It's that area KABW. Again, this area right here, right? And so therefore we'll have, farm owners of capital. Well, it's not landowners, right? It's operators of the farm will continue to take that profit and turn it over into investment, and that will yield greater productivity. As a result of that greater productivity, there'll be more food produced than what's needed for subsistence in the short run, and workers will produce more workers. And that process will continue until we get out to production level M prime. Okay. So we have the arrow here. We can imagine that this production is increasing between M and M prime, slowly, of course. And what do we know is going to happen? Well, as we move towards M prime, assuming subsistence wages remain the same, then we can see that this rate of profit, the amount of profit as well as the rate of profit is going to decline, eventually reaching 0 as we get out to M prime. Okay? All right, let's continue. So the diagram here is again reproduced from your text. Excuse me, I'm paging back here in the text. Page 88 in your blog text. And it illustrates the movement to the steady state. Now, the functions here, there's only two, right? The two functions, the blue function, so this one here, right, concave function, illustrates the diminishing returns to land. So as we increase land usage due to in this increased population, that land is less and less productive. In other words, it yields less and less marginal product, resulting in a declining, so total product increases but at a declining rate. Okay, so that's what our theory of differential rents gives us the shape of that blue function. The other function, the orange function, then is just the projected growth path. So somewhat arbitrary, but it's certainly a linear relationship based upon our assumptions. And if it's a linear relationship, then you get something that looks like this. Again, if the land exhibits sort of different sorts of diminishing returns, you get a slightly different shape, that blue function. And if sort of the growth path is somewhat different, you get a somewhat different slope of the, I guess it's kind of yellowy orangey function there, goldy function. Blue golds, right? If you didn't get that joke, this class is for a class for the University of Wisconsin Eau Claire, and blue and gold are our school colors. All right. Okay, so what do we have? Well, at M, we have the existence of positive profits, and that distance is given by the line segment RP. So at our initial starting point, we're assuming that we're not at the steady state and that profits are positive. Now, again, does it really matter what distance RP is? No, right? It doesn't. It has to be positive to be consistent with what the model's design. As I said, then that causes productivity to increase, and as a result, productivity increases, and that causes population increase, and so we move from P towards R prime. So R prime is the second round, if you will, of production. Once the population has grown sufficiently to fully offset the raise in productivity, and wages have returned back to subsistence. Okay, so that's that process, right? Wages go up, population goes up. Profit, investment occurs, productivity goes up, population goes up. Okay, that process can be described as R to P, P to R prime. Okay, so boom, step 1, step 2, step 3. Okay, and from there, that process continues, right? So at R prime, whatever this M is here, there still are positive profits. They're smaller than they were before, but they're certainly still present. And so this process repeats until when? Until S is reached. Okay, until S is reached. Okay, at S, something distracted me there for a second. At S, the steady state is reached and profits have declined to 0, right? And so at that point, there's no longer any reason to invest to boost productivity or output. In other words, owners of capital / farm workers have no reason to sort of change the way things are to try to accumulate more. It's simply not possible to do so. All the non-rental income is fully exhausted in the subsistence wage payment. Now, is that subsistence wage payment going to be the same as before? Well, it doesn't really matter actually for the model, right? So let's say that subsistence stays where it was. Let's go back a little bit to here. Let's say that subsistence stays at price W. Well, then we reach a steady state in a certain amount of time. Call it X, right? Let's say that subsistence slowly rises over time. So W starts increasing, right? Driving this function northerly. Well, in that case, then the steady state is reached even more quickly, right? Less than it would have been before. Because what's happening, is this function here is rotating up or anti-clockwise. Okay, so the steady state gets reached more quickly than it would have done otherwise. Similarly, what if it's the case that owners of capital simply do not ever reach, so new investment stops before there's 0 profits, right? So owners of capital require some minimal return on their investment. Okay, so I'm giving you a hint, like this is going to be this is going to continue in part 4. This kind of nugget that we're going to zoom off of for part 4, right? So let's say that owners of capital require, say a 3% return or something like that in order to keep the machine just ticking over, right? Or just continuing at where it is now. Well, again, then the steady state is reached even more quickly. Again, that gold function is going to rotate anti-clockwise. Okay, to understand that, going back to here, right? It simply means that as this chunk here is slowly getting squeezed as we move out here, there's actually a point slightly below N prime that where that's the minimum profit that owners of capital are willing to accept, and so the steady state just occurs a little more early, a little more quickly than it would have done otherwise. All right, So that's a Ricardian corn model. It predicts a few things, right? It predicts that the rate of profit as well as the total quantity of profit will fall over time, all things being equal. And that as a result of falling profit, investment will also taper off. As a result of investment tapering off, sort of internal technological change will taper off, and you'll get to a steady state. Okay, so it's sort of like a clock that's wound up, if you will, back here by being before the steady state, and then it slowly winds down until there's no more sort of internal energy, and it just stops moving forward. And of course, what's the initial internal energy? Well, it's the productivity of the natural resources, right? So it's very sort of Malthusian, but not so much. It's more sort of seems kind of like something more biological or something like that, right? So we have a given amount of resources, and what we do over time is we exhaust those resources, and the exhaustion of those resources drives profits down to zero, and that drives incentives down to zero to continually reinvest. And when you get there, you're sort of stuck. Which brings me to the end. Well, what allowances did Ricardo give for getting out of the steady state? Oh, so I mentioned profits decline, right? The other prediction is the rate of economic growth should decline over time, all things being equal. Well, and in that last line, of course, is always the escape hatch for economists, right? All else being equal, and of course that's the case here, right? So Ricardo, notes that you could have agricultural innovation that caused existing land to become more productive, right? To make less productive land look more like productive land, and if you did that, right, then essentially these curves here become flatter, right, and then the steady state is moved further out. It could be that you have other sort of well, let me get to the second one here. Land saving innovation. Can I maybe utilize land to increase yields across the board, right? In which case, those two functions that I just pointed to a moment ago, shift up, right? That's certainly not inconceivable. I really don't know enough about agriculture to say what yields look like on, say, an acre of land or a hectare of land. Those are using metric system. In terms of corn, I don't know how much, but I suspect we can probably grow more corn today on an acre of land or a hectare of land than we could, in Ricardo's time, roughly 200 years ago. And of course, there's the possibility of exogenous technological shifters. In other words, maybe the technology that some other society develops is different than our technology, and we're able to incorporate it into the way we do things without any internal investment. Really anything that sort of shifts the whole productive landscape of the economy in one direction or another is going to alter, either hastening or staving off the steady state. So it's a neat little model. It's sort of self-contained. It's internally logical. You plug numbers into it and work out solutions. You can derive all the stuff that we mentioned there in the beginning from it. Where was it? Slide before that even? No, before that even. We can derive all this stuff from it. We can say, okay, well here, given these conditions, here's what profits are going to be, here's what land rents are going to be, here's what your wages are going to be, here's where you run out of economic growth and why you run out of economic growth. If you alter or if you increase supply for whatever reason, then it shows you what happens to those things. Ricardo's original point was to show what happened if you imported some stuff, right? So corn, right? And he was trying to show that if you allowed for the importation of corn, actually what you did is you maintained local profits rather than diminish them, right? So, because of course, if you don't allow the importation of corn, then you have to expand your local production, which drives what? It drives rate of profit as well as profits across the board down, right? So that was the point of the model. That was what he was trying to show. Anyway, I think we'll leave it right there. That's probably well enough for today, and we'll see you soon next time.